like to call tonight's Lower Macungie Township Board of Commissioners Workshop meeting to order. If we could all please stand for a pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Did we lose our solicitor? Okay. Okay, first item on the agenda this evening, update on McCungie Road storm water concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner. So just for some background, I've been looking at the area of McCungie Road and Crick Lane. One of the things we had heard was concerns for flooding in the area. Probably several months now, we've asked the township engineer to kind of review the area, look at the existing conditions, see where things are. They did bring that report back in March at our workshop. Unfortunately, I wasn't there for that meeting. I was remote, and I wanted to make sure, as we heard additional concerns at another public meeting, kind of review where we are with the things we found and what we've looked at. So we asked Brian to kind of do a quick review, talk about his presentation that he gave, and once again get the board up to speed and the public that may or may not have questions. So, go, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Bruce. Like Bruce said, we did study the Crick Lane culvert relative to flooding concerns. It's approximately a 1,200 acre drainage area that gets down there. The channel itself, as well as a good bit of the surrounding area, is completely within the 100-year FEMA floodplain. And what we found was that basically the Crick Lane culvert will pass the 2-year storm. The 5-year storm, it will not pass. It tops the road slightly. And then everything from that storm and up in increasing magnitude up to the 100-year storm is completely affected by the floodplain of the Little Lehigh Creek. And as a matter of reference, the culvert itself is only give or take 50 feet from the banks of the Little Lehigh. So it's literally right there. And so from an engineering standpoint, it made sense to us that this would possibly be the case, but we did want to see if there was something that possibly could be done. Practically speaking, I don't feel like there's much that can be done because, like I said, the effects of the Little Lehigh on this channel and the surrounding area is such that it is dramatically affected by the flood. That is just the way it is. I don't recall off the top of my head what the drainage area is for the Little Lehigh to this point, but it is significantly larger than 1,200 acres. And it's just a matter of when you're designing bridges, you look at 100-year storm. Back in the day, systems were designed for smaller storms, but we do it a little differently now. And relative to what exists versus what could be done, the possibility of providing capacity for other higher storms would be great, but that possibility doesn't exist because of how close this is to the Little Lehigh itself. So effectively what we found is that the channel, if left to itself, is fine, but because of the backup that it experiences just through nature, because of the Little Lehigh being there, is such that there's not a whole heck of a lot that can be done at this point. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of where we wound up. I don't necessarily want to get into too many technical details per se, but that's the gist of it. And one of the things that I added into my report from March 21st was the township certainly was concerned and had us look also at the basin for the waterfall crossings. I think it is subdivision across the street, across Sauerkraut. And, what we found was that the detention basin that's there, it's not functioning properly. The township is I believe has already reached out to the homeowner that owns that basin to basically correct what's going on. It will provide some benefit, but I'm not going to hit anybody. It's going to be small, because of how large a magnitude the Little Lehigh has on the general area. So we wanted to at least point out that, you know, we did go out on behalf of the township to look at these things and report back on. So we don't have great news, but it's basically, this is what we found.
Brian, can you talk a little bit about the drainage area and what we looked at specifically for how far up? I don't think we, when we task you to kind of look at the area, this isn't like just a low end look of the hydrology of the actual area, correct? We looked further up, and that's why that basin wasn't.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
included in
yeah.
where that was.
And do you have the exhibits that are with the report? Because the one map, it's the stream stats. Nope. Unless I apologize, my eyes are still pretty messed up. It's before that, Renee, you got to scroll back up. It's got a yellow, there you go, the watershed boundary. And the watershed itself stretches up. And I apologize, I'm having a hard time reading. Can you make, what is this?
So like Kings Highway.
Yeah,
Back Drive.
whatever road that is on the bottom of the map, it extends all the way to up in that area. So it's a pretty, it's an extensive drainage area that gets down to that point. Which, I mean, it made sense when we started looking at it. We started figuring out how extensive this drainage area is, and we're comfortable with what we found and flow rates that exist. So we didn't look just at Brick Lane and Sauerkraut Lane and another 100 feet up. The watershed itself extends that far. Yeah, I don't know what else I can add. Honestly.
Anything else from you there, Bruce?
Just questions from the board, if you have any about what we looked at.
Commissioner Robert, questions? All right, I have a couple questions. So a couple things that we discussed the last time this was up. Let's talk about Crick Lane for a minute. We talked about, obviously, there are some issues there when it floods in terms of debris blocking the road and cars going down the road when it really is an outlet to nowhere. What have we done, or what are we doing in terms of looking at closing that road to vehicular traffic?
Yeah, so Crick Lane, we actually had a request several months ago now about what could we do potentially with Crick Lane. We've been trying to analyze internally what the desire may be for the township to close that, as well as what could we do on a walking path connectivity in that area from McCungy Road up into the Millbrook Farms. It seemed like some of the discussions we had came back from the HOA from Millbrook Farms as well. Kind of look at that, and our concern is how can we? That's one of the only gravel roads that we have left in the township. So for those that aren't familiar, that is a unpaved road, and it is gravel. We have, I don't want to say issues, but we have some extra maintenance where we have to go and put additional stone and things of that nature. I think our biggest concern always is how do we leave it kind of existing so it's wide enough to have that access, but then also what do we do with this area that could be underwater or inundated? How should we look at that as part of our trail network? And is this a viable area to have that component? We think it is. I think it would be something that would be proactive to close that component. I know there was always concerns about removal of that pipe that exists now. And I think that pipe's been in for a long, long time, probably, 50s, 60s. I don't know, but being that that's our only gravel roadway, I would say that it's dated. If that's removed, then how do we get pedestrians across there? I don't think on an engineering wide wide review, we're going to be able to kind of put a structure back in there. So we keep that as a walking path. That would have to remain where it is at this point, you know, and in the construct that it has. So we've been thinking about the ideas. I
There are
think-
no houses that are accessed off of Creek Lane?
There are not that I'm aware of. They all kind of feed through. And when I'd taken some original complaints, we do hear that that's a cut through for deliveries, FedEx, all of the people that for some reason want to make it across town that way instead of just going down Macungie Road. So that was a pretty strong concern from the homeowners group. Like I said, I'm sure they would be more than happy to have that and support eliminating that. But that's where we are. Just more or less what we would have to do to vacate a road, close it, get it off the liquid fuels map and go from there. So, and concerns, could we leave it on the liquid fuels map? Could we look at barricades or something of that nature where the roadway remains in case we need that access for fire emergency service if we really need it. But yeah, the big one would be getting rid of the road completely, vacating the road, having it as a walking path.
I mean, there's got to be a way. I've seen other places that have bollards that are placed that are removable. You know, should you have to, you know, I see them on bridges a lot. I think we actually have them on the bridges that cross by Spring Creek so that you can't just drive something over, but if you needed to drive over, they could be removed. So, I mean, even if it's something that's done in steps or, you know, it escalates to where we go as far as we can go.
And I think for us, you know, it's a good discussion. If it sounds like there's some feedback that we can continue with our review of ultimately, you know, turning that into a walking path, and we can keep doing our internal work. So unless, you know, you two gentlemen are opposed to kind of continuing to look at that.
Brian, so just in reading your report and rereading your report and conversations with you, not being an engineer, why we have someone like you here. What you're saying is either changing or increasing the size or adding to what's there right now from a culvert standpoint. It would have to be substantial for anything over 5 years, but even if it was substantial, we don't know that that would fix a problem because of where the water is coming from ultimately.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's unique in that usually, especially with stormwater, if you add another pipe, you're going to get at least twice the capacity and improved conditions. But it's because of how close this is to the Little Lehigh and the backwater effect of the Little Lehigh floodplain that puts you in a position where you're getting very minimal benefit if you, I'll just, for example, double the size of the culvert that's there. You know, if you were to do that, you'd have to make adjustments to the channel for that 50 feet or so down to the Little Lehigh to widen the channel as well. But the only improvement you're going to see is for the 5-year storm. You know, on paper, and I know I've seen the residents' responses to the township. I understand their concerns, but you know, on paper, it's how we have to justify what we're doing. It's statistically or numerically, whatever you want to call it, the benefits completely go away because of the impact. Once you get to that 10-year storm, everything in higher magnitudes, you can't put something in that's going to pass anything because basically running into a wall of water. That's the problem. If there was nothing downstream, or if it was a matter of, hey, there's an obstruction in the channel between the culvert and the Little Lehigh, let's look at that, remove that obstruction, would we get better flow conditions? We don't even have that possibility because it is literally 50 feet or less to the banks of the Little Lehigh. So it's really a unique situation that puts us in this weird, like, how much benefit can we find, or at least in terms of representing the township, recommend to the township, here's what the benefits are going to be. You know, I wouldn't say there are going to be none, that would be not, that wouldn't be factual. But they're so limited because of the other conditions that it's hard to say, let's go try this. You know, that's kind of where it puts us in an awkward position where the magnitude of the storms, the 2-year, the 5-year, they're generally so small, we just don't deal with them. You deal with all of the higher order storms. So it's another example of what do you do about the 2-year storm and the 5-year storm? Well, everything's designed for the storms that are bigger, so they usually just pass and it's no big deal. But we have a very old culvert that's very close to one of the main rivers in the valley. So, you know, I don't want to just say you can't do anything but I'm just trying to make the point that if something were to be done, there would be incremental benefits. And I say that very cautiously because I suspect that these are the residents that live there. I don't want to be in any way disparaging of their concerns. It's just from a purely engineering standpoint, there's a benefit to here, and then usually we're looking at the stuff that's higher up the ladder, so to speak. So that's kind of where we're at.
But there's also, you have to balance out what the improvement or outcome is versus what the cost is to get there at the same time.
Oh, there's no question. And I've been very careful to not mention that
I can,
because.
because that's what we do here.
Well, no. Yes, but that's the thing. We're in the floodplain. So if we were to move forward with, for instance, what Bruce was saying about possibly removing it or turn it into it's no longer vehicular traffic, we don't need the culvert anymore, whatever, I still would feel comfortable suggesting that we probably are going to need permits to do any of that because it is in the floodplain. We could easily check with FEMA, check with DEP to see what they would require. But I have yet to ever have a project in the floodplain that didn't require at least outreach and confirmation of whether or not they'd want a permit. And rarely do you have a situation where you're removing culvert. Usually it's adding one or increasing the size of it. But again, these are very unique circumstances that we have for this particular culvert.
Well, removing the culvert wouldn't really accomplish anything, would it?
Well, that's what I was trying to suggest.
Removing the culvert wouldn't really accomplish anything.
It would provide a benefit, but a marginal benefit because of the way the floodplain from the Little Lehigh affects everything else. So what our calculations show is that for the 5-year storm, Brick Lane is overtopped slightly because of the culvert size. But beyond that, it's completely underwater, no matter what you do. So I wouldn't be telling you the truth if I said you can't do anything because there's no impact. But the truth is, for the 5-year storm, you would probably be able to do something where the 5-year storm would pass. Sure.
But the unnamed tributary that also feeds into that area. For a 2-year storm, it would be using the culvert.
Well, right now, what we're showing is the 2-year storm will pass effectively through the culvert and through the channel itself. Everything functions as everybody would hope it would. For the 5-year storm, the size of the culvert causes a slight backup. The water tops Crick Lane, and then it just is what it is. After that is where you start to get the Little Lehigh impact. But for the 2-year storm, our calculations suggest that everything functions. There's clear flow through the channel, through the culvert, and out to the Little Lehigh with no obstructions. But again, 5-year storm, if the culvert was slightly bigger, yeah, you'd see a benefit. But that's where, to Commissioner Higgins's point, that when you're talking about the dollars, you know, you look at what's the financial cost and what kind of benefit are you going to get. In all seriousness, if we felt like you're going to see a dramatic impact in the positive here, that's what my letter would have suggested. But purely from a calculation standpoint, it's a marginal benefit if that culvert was upsized or completely removed.
Public comments, questions.
Thank you.
Remember, just state your name and address for the record into the microphone. Thank you.
My name is George Kane. The address is 2996 Macungie Road. I am directly across from the end of Crick Lane. Also here tonight is Juan Betancourt, who's at 3056 Macungie Road. He is on the opposite side of the street from me. He's on the same side of the street as the tributary. And John Ulickney is 3101 Macungie Road, lives next to Juan, so he's one house upstream. John has the most experience because he's lived in the township in his present home 12 or 14 years, something like that. I don't mean to be not respectful, but my first comments have to do with the premise that the engineering firm came up with. And that is that the floodwater, tailwater effect of the Little Lehigh Creek is what floods Juan's property and John's property, and it's false. Have you had anyone on staff on site when these flooding conditions occur to witness that?
We had an inspector out and took pictures for a storm where Brick Lane was flooded. Don't recall exactly what category storm that was, but we've seen that.
It does flood because it overflows the culvert.
Right.
And the direction of that flow, sir, is from the tributary to the creek. 95% of the time, we have video of that. So it's not just us saying so. We've witnessed it. We have video of that. The floodwaters of the Little Lehigh, fortunately, go to the north side of the creek in township property, which is wooded on the sort of the northwest corner of that intersection. It floods acres. Across Macungie Road, which is the greenway for the Millbrook plan up on the hill north of Crick Lane, across the creek and north of Crick Lane, that greenway floods, and it is tens of acres. The roadway north of the bridge floods first. It has to be a heck of a storm to flood and close the bridge. Even then, the tributary collects water locally, 1,200 acres, roughly two square miles. It consistently crests before the Lehigh does. I've been there 6 years, and it's never been the other way around. And what we see with each sizable storm is that the tributary backs up at the culvert, tops Brick Lane, and flows to the creek. And that continues except in the absolute worst of conditions. But the video that we have is from August 4th, 2020, in the aftermath of a hurricane when we got 8 or 9 inches of rain in 4 or 5 hours. And the video is dramatic because it's a measurable depth of flow, like a foot across Brick Lane into the creek. It's not the creek water that floods the Betancourt's property or Ulickney's property. It's just not a fact. And that destroys your premise and puts this whole situation in another light. The culvert's too small. Your calculations have proven that. It's old and it precedes probably a lot of the development in the area. So there's a lot more flow in that tributary. In years past, John said he could step across that tributary in his at the end of his backyard. A good broad jumper can't jump across that now because of the amount of erosion that has occurred to the banks of that tributary under storm conditions. It is a totally different stream.
Mr. Kane, I'll stop you right there because I get your point and you don't have to belabor it. I'm going to ask you a simple question. What do you want done?
Well, there are a couple of things that could be done upstream.
I'm not asking what can be done. What do you want done to fix the problem?
I want the township to take action to mitigate the flooding that affects private property. Yes, we live in a floodplain, but it doesn't have to be unnecessary flooding.
Okay,
And
now,
right-
I'm going to stop here for a second. we've gone to our professionals. They've given us a study that says that what you're asking for does not alleviate the problem. I'm not saying they're wrong or right. I'm not an engineer. That's why we hire engineers. I know that you're an engineer by trade. Have you done any study on this area yourself? Or
I've done field study.
have you gone out and actually gotten a professional engineered study? I'm asking you because that's what we've done so far, and we can only go on what we know or we're told. It would be foolish for me to get a report from our engineer and then turn to my engineer and say, you're flat out wrong.
Well, people are wrong sometimes.
I understand that, but there has to be another study done to contradict that. No, listen, sir.
No, I haven't
Listen,
paid
I'm
for
being
that,
very
and I'm not about to.
Please don't roll your eyes at me when I'm talking to you. I'm trying to have a conversation because I want to come up with a solution for you and for your neighbors. I've lived here for 20 years. Anytime there's a major storm, that bridge is underwater, that road is underwater. I've seen it since the day I moved in here. I would like to come up with a solution, honestly. But what you're doing is you're using basically conjecture.
No,
You're using what you've seen to dispel a scientific study. The only way to dispel that study is with another study. Now, should we go out and find another engineer to do a different study to compare? Would you?
if that's the only way that you would consider it, then I would say yes. My tax dollars, spend them, yes.
Okay.
Because damage is a cost that we can't recover.
Okay. That's a fair answer.
We have a number of suggestions to make based on our observation,
Okay.
which is field work, which is real. Okay.
Mhm.
No, we haven't paid for a study. No apologies there. And as I said, the very first comment, I'm not attacking anybody. I'm just saying the conclusion there does not match reality.
Okay.
If the culvert were removed and the channel opened up, it wouldn't back up and that water would get to the creek. Would there still be some risk of flooding? Sure, depending on the storm. But there'd be less than there is now. Water comes directly up to their houses. The water that sits there is charging the water table. We live in the lowlands. My problem, Juan's problem, is that water table water infiltrates our basements. I've had a $26,000 flood claim in the 6 years I've lived there. I had insurance. But what we're talking about is what can be done to mitigate what they experience directly. I experience it indirectly, but I like to be involved in helping them out. They can also speak for themselves, but the upstream retention basin that you made mention of, I'd like to know how much of a demand has been placed on that property owner that modified the basin so that there is no controlled outflow, it's uncontrolled outflow. What's the answer to that?
I don't understand the premise of the question. So I'm gonna go to my professional.
Yeah,
Brian,
the
do
township,
you understand that?
this was done through Zach.
Okay.
The township requested that the resident basically put the basin back the way it was as it was approved, I don't know, on the order of 10 years ago. So, because right now,
You've requested, don't you have any legal authority to have it returned to the plan approval?
So that's correct. So what we do is we reach out to the property owner if they choose or elect not to return that to its designed abilities. We then start an enforcement action. The enforcement action, is handled by the solicitor and our stormwater officer, and that takes time. So by the time we notify them, give them a chance to correct what's in that basin, and then they have, the due process to follow through the legal process. So that is not we go to them and say, you must fix this right now. When we did that and we issue a violation letter, and then it starts the process. So that's how that works when we look at the enforcement side.
And eventually, I mean, you go to court and it has to be,
Yeah, correct.
Right.
We have to go represent, our case. And we're hopeful in front of the judge that we have enough to, make that person comply. And that the judge in court also feels the same way.
that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
and I would hope we could be kept informed as to what's going on.
Well-
Because it will, in some measure, improve it downstream.
That I can't promise you. If it goes to legal issues are not discussed in public for a lot of different reasons. But rest assured, our goal is to restore that basin to its proper working function as it was designed when it was built. The best I can give you on
All right. I have an answer for a question that you
Mhm.
ran by us after the commissioners meeting.
that. Yes,
The retention basin at the corner of Sauerkraut and Macungie Road that services, is it Windmill or
Mhm.
whatever the
Watermill.
pla-
Yeah,
whatever.
watermill.
That outlet structure it's a concrete outlet structure, has a steel plate on the face of it, and it has equally spaced slots all the way up the face from the very bottom. The reason that basin doesn't hold water is it can run out there from 6 inches of water in the basin. That's why you don't see water in that basin. That's not very controlled outflow, my comment.
Okay.
The third thing is the proposed development for the cove at Millbrook.
I'm going to stop you right there. And this is why, Mr. Kane, I'm going to ask you once again, don't shake your head at me when I'm stopping you. I'm stopping you for a reason. That plan, and I understand what's been proposed, has not come before this board for land development. We cannot comment on anything with that plan until it gets here. It's getting close, and your time to comment on all that will be plentiful. I promise you. There will be plenty of questions asked, but we cannot comment on something we haven't seen. It's to the detriment of the developer, which can lead to legal issues. So we're not going to discuss that tonight because it's not before this board yet.
I hear you. It has been before the planning commission.
It's,
We attended such a meeting.
again, this is not the planning commission. This is the board of commissioners. That is a recommending body to the board. Everything goes to the planning commission first before it gets to us. It is not an item for this board yet. It will be. And
Good.
when that happens, I guarantee you there will be much discussion around that topic.
I have a lot to say, and you're probably going to shut me down on what I have to say further because it sounds like unless you decide to fund another study, that nothing is going to happen because the do nothing option has been recommended. And I can tell you, there are 3 homeowners here extremely disappointed with that decision and the fact that it stands unless you ignore, well, even though you ignore personal witnessed experience that's on tape. That really gets me.
Well, listen, I'm going to tell you the same thing I tell my wife. It's disappointing when someone tells me what I've decided before I've decided anything. We've gotten a recommendation. No decision's been made. We're gathering information so we can make the best decision for all residents. The 3 of you included, and anybody else who lives around you. I ask you not to prejudge what we're going to do before we actually do it. We understand your frustration. I understand. I can see it. I can feel it. You're not unlike many other residents who have similar issues where they are. Development's a tough thing. Development causes some good things. It causes a lot of bad stuff. But government's also not in the business of stopping people from doing what they want with their property. We're here to enforce the regulations and the codes as they stand. And we'll continue to do that. I tell you this because I would tell this to anybody. You are within your right to challenge our study with your own. I don't expect you to do it. I wouldn't do it. I'm not going to spend that kind of money on that because it's expensive. But don't prejudge that we've made a decision. We haven't. We're going to hear all information possible. In a normal situation, I would let you speak for 3 minutes. That's what your right is. You could speak all night if you want. Because we don't shut anybody down. We want people to be involved in the process. That's why we reach out to you. That's why we sent you the study. I understand you disagree with it, and I probably would too if I were in your shoes. But we're going to continue to look at this and come up with what is the best outcome for everybody. It may not be the best outcome for you specifically or the one you want, but hopefully it's better than what you have. And at the same time, it's not detrimental to everybody else in the township. We will spend your tax dollars because that's what we do, but I also want to point out that we don't charge you many tax dollars for the most part. You know, our property tax in this township amounts to a membership fee. You might pay $200 a year. There's a lot of things we could get done with higher taxes, and none of us up here are about to do that because we think what we have is pretty good. And we have to try to find ways to improve things with the money we have. And that's how it's going to stand as long as, you know, I can tell you this board's here because we haven't raised anybody's taxes in 12 years. There's not one person on this board that's ever voted to raise a tax. We're not going to do that now. But we'll find a way to accommodate as much as we can. And your issue is very top of mind, which is why it's on this agenda, which is why we're going to continue to talk about it and find a reasonable solution.
Prevention is the best cure.
Always is.
My name is Elizabeth Kane. I live
Yes.
at 2996 Macungie Road. I have a couple questions about the study. As my husband said, the flow of the Little Lehigh kind of divides or breaks off as it approaches a big curve where the township floodplain is that's treed on the north side of the bridge. And then the first thing that happens is the road starts to overflows the road, Macungie Road, and it creates a new channel in effect. And so that channel starts rising, the channel where the bridge is. So you're actually having two channels, and the velocity in each channel is at the center point of the channel. So the water continues to rise, and as it goes over the bridge, eventually, it laps up Macungie Road. It doesn't flow south on Macungie Road. It laps. Meanwhile, the water in the unnamed tributary comes down to the culvert. The culvert is under capacity, and sometimes it's worse than that because there are sliding boards and outdoor chairs and all kinds of debris that come down there and get stuck at the face of the culvert. I don't know what you do about that, but the water doesn't actually overflow at the culvert. It actually comes into Mr. Betancourt's yard and finds a low spot and then overflows into the Little Lehigh. And I'm sure that the maintenance department can attest to this because when they have a washout there, they come with gravel. Sometimes they put, paving down, but it's not at the location of the culvert. It's like halfway from the culvert to Macungie Road, which is the low spot. And this water, as the creek water is rising and it's lapping up, and it's the fastest part of the flow is in the center of the channel, correct? On the outskirts, on the south and the north, it's a very gentle flow. So as this flow is meeting the flow of the tributary, the flow of the tributary is more powerful and more concentrated, and it's rebuffing the flow from the Little Lehigh, in other words, okay? So I want to know, in your study, do you take into account that there are sort of two channels that rise with this and have various velocities and, have various effects when the Little Lehigh overflows? Because it goes from about a 25-foot wide creek to two creeks, and then eventually it's over 100 feet wide. And even though, and I've looked at FEMA maps and so forth and so on, these studies and these maps are done with aerial and what I want to call it, contour lines on maps. And they're not always the most accurate things around. And I do think that they change their maps. They're not permanently 100%, this is it. They revise their maps because they're not always right, because they're based on assumptions. As I'm sure your study is based on assumptions, FEMA maps that may or may not be accurate, maybe some observation and so forth. But I do not feel that in the flooding that we have seen, that the Little Lehigh will in any way come up to Betancourt's house and will definitely not come up to Eulichny's house, maybe in the 500-year storm. But meanwhile, the creek, which used to be this wide, just has such capacity based on how many housing plans have gone in since these houses were built. And the force of the water there is astounding. It's almost running as fast as the Little Lehigh is at that point. And I understand the engineer's explanation that they want to get the water out of these tributaries before the water crests in the Little Lehigh. But it ain't happening, and again, these are theoretical things that some engineer with a very sharp pencil on a clean piece of paper comes up with, but it just doesn't always happen that way in nature. And especially if you don't have an even distribution of rainfall. We could have a terrible storm here and Berks County has nothing. Well, then the Little Lehigh is not going to have the volume of floodwaters that you would expect. And if they have a lot of flooding and we don't have anything, well, then it's kind of a non-event here. But at this point, I feel like the Benton Courts property is being used as a retention basin with no compensation. That's how I feel personally. And having seen the retention basin at the corner of Macungie Road and Sauerkraut, I would request that the township look into that. It's a pretty decent sized retention basin. And if all it does is immediately let the water out into the unnamed tributary, then it's useless. What is it there for?
Yeah, I can tell you that we're well aware of that one
Yeah.
because that's another
Right.
problem we're dealing with because the people who live across the street own the basin and would not like to own it anymore and would
Yeah.
like us to buy it from them, which we're not doing, but we can
Yes.
make them,
It was
fix
put
it.
there, it was put there for a reason to allow the development to proceed without inundating the houses downstream. And
It's just a strange situation where people who built the development attached that basin to a house.
right,
And these folks came in and bought the house years later without having any understanding that they're responsible for the basin.
right. Well, that should be like part of an HOA. But I look at that date on the Lower Macungie Township seal, 1832. My house was built in 1806. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Betancourt's house was built around 1850 and Mr. Eulichny's house sometime 1920 or so. Our houses predate every other structure, except perhaps the barn that's associated with the farm on Indian Creek Road. And, every plan that was approved by the Planning Commission and people like you thinking that you're going to take care of it. It's not really going to affect our houses, but it has. And I just would like to see some type of understanding or conclusion that even if getting rid of or increasing the capacity of the culvert only takes you up to a 5-year storm, you could have 0 to 5 year storms for the next 100 years. A 100-year storm does not mean that it happens once in 100 years. It means it has a 1% chance of happening each year. So it could not right? Am I correct in that? You could go 100 years and only have 2% storms and 3% storms and 4% storms, and that culvert could handle it. And we'd be happy. So I would like to know how you approach the fact that there are sort of two channels coming down there and the velocities that would push.
Well, if I may, we did not study the Little Lehigh. And if I followed you correctly, you're talking about how the flow in the Little Lehigh is affected as the floodwaters rise. We did not study the Little Lehigh. I don't want anybody to be misled. It would be a much, much, much more detailed study.
Okay.
We were not asked to do
So
that.
you're simply looking at the FEMA maps and saying,
Correct.
this bulge here it represents the fact that the Little Lehigh could start creeping south on Lower McConkey Road.
We are looking at current data and information available on hand.
Yeah.
The FEMA maps are what they are. I think I'd like to at least explain that FEMA, like any engineer or any agency, they're going to work with the best available information at the
Right,
time of
right.
that study. Okay. And I can tell you that FEMA has, I'm doing this for over 35 years, but they have gone through and done updates to their respective flood maps. And that is based purely on the fact that technology has advanced as much as it has. The contouring that's available now is much more accurate than it was 20 or 30 years ago. And I can tell you that the mapping has gotten better, in part because the computer programs available
And
to calculate the flows has gotten much more accurate. It's
the
much
satellites have helped with that.
maybe, but it's just, things have gotten to the point where it's much easier to do more accurate calculations. Okay. So I certainly wouldn't suggest that FEMA is doing things because they thought they made mistakes. I'm just saying, I know that they make the updates because of improvements in technology and because they're as aware as anybody that conditions change. And so we did not do a study of the Little Lehigh by
Okay.
any stretch. That would be an incredibly
Beyond
expensive
the
proposition.
scope of what you were hired
Well,
to
we
do.
were looking specifically at the Crick Lane culvert and how the flooding, what could we do, if anything, with the flooding in this particular area. So, we did not do a study of the two parts that you're talking about. We looked at what's available, and what's available shows what we had up on screen before. And so that's what we looked at. It was very specific, in terms of what we were analyzing. And we based on information available to us, like
Yeah.
would be available to any engineer.
One of
I
the,
cannot,
go ahead.
well, in all fairness, you asked like 10 questions, I think, and I'm trying to,
Sorry.
no, it's fine. But the FEMA one in particular, I wanted to address because they do make updates
Yes, I
from
know
time
they
to
do.
time. And so, I don't know when the next one's coming out, but I do know that they make the adjustments relative to new technology. Okay. But when I say we, my registered engineer, I just can't do designs and recommendations based on anecdotal information. I've been listening. We've seen all the different correspondence from you, your husband, your neighbors. We understand.
Yeah.
And I was trying to be diplomatic earlier and saying, like, I understand what you guys are expressing, but I can't just make suggestions to the township based on, we got word that this is flooding and we got word that it's not. So you guys are basically saying what I said is completely untrue because you live there and you see it. And that's not really the case. I can't dispute what you see, but I also can't do my calculations and make recommendations to the board, whether it's here or any other township, based purely on anecdotal evidence. We based it on all the different information available that I would assume any other engineer reviewing the situation would use.
Yes.
So you know, by no means are we suggesting that physics somehow works backwards at that creek and the water's flowing up. We're basing it on the elevations provided by FEMA for those storms and what it does to that channel.
I'd venture to say, though, that nobody's ever seen that water come south on Macungie
Well,
Road. But be that as it may,
That,
you know,
that's part of,
when-
that's part of the concern that I can't say that I can answer some of your questions because so much of what you and your husband are representing is based on what you've seen.
yes,
And we cannot perform our calculations
Okay.
based just on anecdotal evidence.
okay.
I'm not saying by any means that I don't believe you, but we can't make our recommendations.
I would like to point out that when we started looking into this a little bit further, George looked at the different storms that we've experienced, and apparently August of 2020 was the highest level on the Lehigh River. I'm sorry, on the Little Lehigh since ever. So, you know, storms are getting worse. We understand that. But the 2020 storm, for all we know here, that could be the 100-year storm. We don't know.
We also don't know that it could just become the norm now.
That could become the norm. You're right.
Because I
Correct.
mean, like I said, I've been here 20 years. I've seen some pretty hellacious storms here, more than I can even possibly imagine happening again, but they seem to happen all the time. I mean, this building was underwater.
August of 2020. This is the,
Yes,
20.
August of
the-
2020 was
Yeah.
kind of the
Same storm,
record
right.
in the
So-
past
You know, so while it was
75 years.
bad for you, it was bad for a lot of places. I mean,
Mhm.
we were closed for what, a month and a half?
easily.
Yeah.
It was the
Uh,
first time that, not to interrupt you, but it was the first time that even staff members here that have been here a long time ever had seen water.
Yeah, I mean, if
The
you
way it
go out-
wasn't
if
in
you
the
look at the
building.
back of this building where the fence is, the water is at the top of the fence. That's a 6-foot fence. So,
Mhm.
yeah, it was
There-
pretty bad.
There was 2 feet of water in this basement. The drive up entrance, the basement.
Well, at any rate, I do appreciate that you're going to look into both the retention pond in the backyard of someone's house and also the retention pond at the corner of Macungie Road and Sauerkraut, because I do believe any little bit helps. And it's one thing to experience perhaps one storm where, you know, we have 3 feet of water in our basement, but it's quite another thing to experience that repetitively. So if this can help with the 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%, and 5% flows, I think that would be a good outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm John Ulickney, 3101 Macungie Road. I'm not gonna sit here and run you guys around, but, I just want to talk about my property and the tributary that's being destroyed. Most of it is land erosion. Like they've mentioned, it was a small stream at one time once I moved in to my house, 2009. And it is now in some places twice, if not 3 times the size of what it used to be. Some of the problems I've had with my property, I've had over 7 trees come down across the tributary onto my property. I've had one of Juan's previous owner, Rick Oster, one of his came down on the other side, crossing the creek. And I've also lost about, probably 3 to 4 feet by 50 feet of my property due to land erosion. So I had to bring in almost 10 to 15 tons of fill, repair that. And I don't think that's right. So what do you guys have to think about that? I mean, I live in a floodplain. I live in a floodplain, but you don't have the right to destroy my property by dumping all that water into my backyard.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't see it as that we're destroying your property. It's nature. Nature's destroying your property. And is water looking for a place to go because development has happened? Absolutely. There's
yeah,
no two
well, you
ways
need
about
to,
it.
I think you need to work on something in the development process. Obviously, you're putting too much water in that stream.
No, people have the right to do with their land what's allowed.
Well, yeah, but you gotta control the water somehow, some way.
And I will tell
And
you that
obviously, it's not
I
being
can tell
done
you
the
that
right way.
every plan that's come before this board has an answer for controlling water.
Well, I mean,
And I would tell you that almost 99% of it doesn't work. So I don't know what the answer is, to be perfectly honest with you.
I don't know what it is either, but I mean, the previous homeowners lived in that property for 58 years and never had a problem. And all of a sudden, when I move in 3 to 4 years later, I got some big problems going on. You know,
I find it hard to believe they had no problems in 58 years. Maybe they told you they didn't, but
the creek wasn't eroded, trees were still there. I mean, why all of a sudden did that change?
I don't know what to tell you. I mean, it stinks. It really stinks.
It does. I have also pictures here that you guys.
Thank you. We let anybody talk.
This will be quick. Thank you.
Sure.
My name is Paul Ulickney. I live at 6561 Ridge Road Extension in Zionsville, Pennsylvania. I have a very similar situation on my property as the undersized culvert there. It's a private bridge or a private culvert on my property and experiences very, very similar attributes. One of the things that questions that I have is that, you know, I've had my property developed. My daughter built a house. We had to make drawings. And I'll tell you what, the 100-year floodplain that the engineers calculated is spooky accurate. I mean, when my creek floods, it is very, very close to where those boundaries are. One question I have is, this is an engineering question, does the engineering study take into account the timing of the flow between the fact that this little tributary probably crests in hours, whereas the Little Lehigh doesn't crest for days? And actually, in the Planning Commission, it was brought up that the Little Lehigh Basin Commission wants this water to get out really quick before the cresting happens on the Little Lehigh. So to the degree that you would make a basin bigger, it would allow that water to get out quicker to that. But did the engineering calculations that concluded that the water is flowing backwards into the culvert take into account timing of when the peaking happens?
We did the calculations based on the flow to the culvert itself. The time for the water from the furthest reach in the watershed to the Crick Lane culvert.
Mhm.
And that's what we determined that, you know, it'll pass the 2-year storm and not quite past the 5-year. Beyond that, any kind of timing with the peaks, I am certain that that's what happens with this watershed as compared to the Little Lehigh.
Mhm.
We have to look at worst case. We did not run separate, basically routing calculations to determine what is this peak at Crick Lane versus the peak of the Little Lehigh.
So you took like the worst case peak for 10 years, let's say, is here on the Little Lehigh, and this is the 10-year peak on the tributary,
Well,
and it did not
we
take
looked
into
at-
account the timing of the two.
I don't want to agree and misstate something, but
Okay.
we looked at FEMA's flows for the Little Lehigh for the 10-year storm. So what they're showing at that point was the flow that we looked at. But we had also done calculations to get the 2-year and the 5-year storms for the Crick Lane culvert. We didn't roll further with the 10-year storm because of the impact of the Little Lehigh, as I was expressing earlier. So to answer your question, no, we did not look at what is the 10-year peak for the Little Lehigh at that peak time versus the peak time for the channel. I think based on the Act 167 ordinance that was done and the fact that this particular sub-watershed is basically the conditional no detention district,
Mhm.
the impact would be that that's why they want the water to come and go sooner.
With the flow into the
So,
creek.
you know, but again, for the purposes of trying to determine what exactly are we seeing here,
Yeah.
you could probably take things to a much more finite level. But I'm not sure how far that is going to get us.
I was just trying to rationalize why their observations don't match the engineering calculations. And I think the key to it is timing, in so much as this stuff comes down so quickly and should be going into the Little Lehigh before the Little Lehigh crests a day or 2 or 3 later. It takes a while for that to get down there.
And it's
And that's the
entirely
basic of the
possible,
act.
it's
So-
entirely possible that that's what's happened.
Happening. Yeah.
But again, I can't, we're
Yep.
trying to look at worst case.
Okay, I'm just saying that's why I think the observation's there. The other thing I have is just one other thing, is that when you have an undersized culvert like this is extremely undersized. I mean, the diameter of this thing is, about yay big, okay? It will catch everything that comes down that creek as mine does, okay? And all you need is one lawn chair, one branch, one something to hit it. And then that basically, everything else will catch on it, and it defeats the whole purpose of the culvert. It dams up immediately, as mine does. And then it overflows and it backs up and does everything else. A larger culvert, just on that point alone, to allow debris to flow through. And, if you had a decent sized culvert, not another giant one, but if you even had a decent sized culvert, a lot of that debris would just flush through and you wouldn't get the backup that you get in the damming effect of almost anything that comes down. So, I wish I could afford to put a bridge over my creek and get rid of my pipe, but it's extremely expensive for me to do that. So I live with taking the debris out almost every storm. So, a bigger culvert, X of the engineering calculations, would allow more debris to flow through and would really make, I think, a tremendous difference in how much flooding happens upstream.
Thank you.
Final brief comment. I have talked to people at the Conservation District, and there is money in Pennsylvania for municipalities to, perform stormwater management. And he did say that he could talk to you or your engineer about possibly applying for some of this money if you were going to increase the size of the culvert or put a bridge there instead of a culvert or whatever. So that option would not necessarily cost the township a lot of money, and I do believe it should be explored.
Thank you. Yeah, staff has been in consistent communication with the Conservation District, specifically around this and pending development in that area. So yes, thank you very much, though, for bringing that to our attention. Anything else on this subject?
Hello, my name is Juan Betancourt. Live on 3067 Mackenzie Road. I just want to second what my neighbor John just said. And also, I am concerned about the erosion, just because we do have a lot of big trees around the creek. And even though I'm not an engineer, I don't understand too much of studies and stuff like that, but you could actually see on the flow that stays on the property. So when there's a lot of rain and the creek overflows, it will stay there for a while. And also, when you go back into the creek and the water decreases, you could actually see like little steps. So that means there's erosion there. And if it gets to the roots of the trees, it's gonna happen what happened to my neighbor. I'm concerned because, it's gonna cost me thousands of dollars just try to fix that if I wanna cut all those trees around my property. And, I'm concerned also if it falls on us when we're walking around the property. I got a 2-year-old. He gotta be outside. He's gonna have to play. That's why I bought a property like this. And I don't wanna be talking about like studies and stuff like that because I only be there 6 months. I just bought the property last year. But that's my concern when I talk with my neighbors, when I see what's going on. And the times that it's been flooded on the times that I've been on that property, yes, it's scary.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Pictures, but basically what's happening is when the creek is backing up or whatever from the culvert all the way up to my property and his property, there's, a property line, and basically the water cuts over right at my line and goes all the way through his yard. Now, there's also another section up the stream from my property that in about 5 years, nothing's gonna be done. I'm gonna have a stream in the middle of my yard. There's that much erosion going on. So I don't want to stream in the middle of my.
Sure. Understood. Thank you. Okay, item number 2, update on oh no, that was number 2. Item number 3, review Quarry Road Compost Center Road right-of-way plan.
Thank you. So what we wanted to do was have a discussion in front of the board of where we are on the compost center roadway. You may or may not recall the roadway that's going to come from Sauerkraut extension to the township compost facility has been constructed by Prologis for us. At some point, they're going to need to turn over the required land and that roadway that they've done for us. You'll see by the plan that Renee's displayed, the location of the compost center roadway as it relates to the future, the existing lot 12 plus the future warehouse complex located on that. As part of the settlement subdivision for Spring Creek and the lawsuit and litigation from before, it said that the township would have access to the compost site. There would be a roadway constructed in this area. We already obtained easements from Lutron as well as the former Dodona property to the cul-de-sac. What we wanted to get in front of the board, just to let you know, is this is going to be moving fairly quickly, hopefully. The acceptance and dedication of the required area there. So what we've been talking about as a staff is basically two different concepts, a right-of-way plan and the benefits of right-of-way to the township, or a potential subdivision of the land that would put that component of roadway there. Internally, we're still working between Brian, Mark, and myself on the best approach to how this is going to be or work through. As Nate's noted, there is technically an easement on the lot 12 plan that shows the roadway on there. We want to make sure that we have the appropriate acceptance either through the right of way or the subdivision so that we can have the board consider adopting that and accepting it, getting that to the liquid fuels people at PennDOT. That will allow us to spend the paving dollars in this year's budget and in the project that my update in 5.3 to allow us to move forward. So we're thinking internally as a staff, we know where we want to go and then have this before the board at the June 6th meeting, as we said, to get it kind of moving forward with that. We think there's, advantages to looking at both of these concepts. But, as we work with Mark and get to the legality there, we just wanted you to know that we are working and see if you had any feedback or concerns about either way if we do that. So, like I said, Brian has a quick subdivision plan that's up before you, but we're looking at other alternatives.
Okay, and about the acceptance of the Sauerkraut Lane extension so that we can accommodate the warehouse. What's the status on that part of it?
Yeah, so we have to wait for Prologis to complete some of their tasks there. I can't speak for them. I would assume in the next potential month or so until we can get that in front of the board and formally adopt that roadway. There hasn't been discussion with Prologis about when that's going to occur, so I can't really give you that kind of feedback, but that's what we're waiting on. At some point, we will have to do that one when they're complete with their work.
Okay.
I think we're calling that a truck logistics center. Use that W word. Okay. Moving forward then, item 4, review amended policy for sale of personal property.
Yeah, so we adopted a resolution some time ago that helped us be compliant with the law on how we dispose of all of our surplus equipment and items. What we found after working with it, of course, we needed to make some adjustments. A couple of those being those items that are completely broken and unserviceable. Instead of bringing them back and making them go to municipal bid, one of these components allowing the township manager to deem those as broken and of no value, and just going right to the destruction or removal of those items. We found and I'll give you some examples. We had like a TV that's been broken. We've had some cell phones that don't even work anymore on the network. Our policy says technically we have to put those out to bid. I don't really want to be, giving away or selling broken stuff. So part of the amendment is allowing me to dispose of those assets. So the other components, Mark has made the adjustment to make sure we're compliant. You'll see in the back component or the lower component of just the regular first class township code and how those assets are disposed of. So a couple tweaks. The major one is that I'm allowed to get rid of those items that are junk.
Okay, questions? Okay, manager updates, 5.1, multi-municipal manhole maintenance and rehab projects.
Yes, I just wanted to give the board a couple updates on a few things. This is one of our projects that we had budgeted for this year to look and repair some manholes. Upper Macungie did throw a bid out for some of this rehab work. We figured to be good partners, let's jump in all together. They've had their engineer prepare the specs based on the information that we've also provided them. So where we're at right now is an approximate $165,000 budget. We've put in for 26 manholes for epoxy lining, full depth on those. And we're looking to have those bids back May 31st. We're hopeful we can get a recommendation either way that we're on budget and on time to bring that back to the board too, potentially at the June 6th meeting, and make sure you're comfortable with us moving ahead with that project. If we're on budget, I would recommend that we proceed with that. Hopefully we get better values since we went in with, I believe, I think Salisbury jumped in and Copley Whitehall onto that bid and us. So just wanted to kind of update, make sure there was no issues or concerns as long as we're on our numbers. So we good? All right. 5.2 solid waste collection contract. And we gave an brief update to the board Thursday night. But we did meet with mandatory pre-bid meeting last Wednesday with 4 vendors. We anticipate the last round of questions no later than Wednesday. We'll prepare a response for anything we've further received. What we wanted to do was some public outreach. The residents may or may not have gotten several of our forms of communication, and we wanted to update the board with what we did. We're very concerned that we have feedback from residents that they have not heard anything about this. So we want to continue to talk about these at all the meetings. We did, and Renee prepared a mailer that went out to 9,261 property owners to talk about where we were. Hopefully, if you've received that, let us know. We're starting to hear that they're trickling out. We also took our list of customers that we have email addresses for, which is only about 3,200. And you'll see what Renee did with recreation, and they've been working as a team. We took our mailer to what we call constant contact, which is a way we provide information for recreation, and you can use it all the way through for all kind of interesting stuff. So we took that notification letter, we sent it to our 3,575 emails that we had on the record. What you'll see, and quite surprising, 77.6% of the people opened those notices. So 2,433 opens. We had a couple bounce backs. 3,268 successful deliveries on that. And we have a click rate of about 420 people that are clicking through to see our stuff on our website. So we're hopeful, at least on that end, that we got a few more people. We also, you'll see in the pie chart there where we were. We also used our phone notification system, phone email notification system through Civic Notify. And we pushed that message last Friday as well. So we want the board to know that we're trying as best as we can, updating the website, having these discussions, doing mailers and everything to get to the public. Our tentative dates, that June 6th, we will open bids. We'll work as a staff to try to get through them fairly quickly, give the board a brief update at that meeting in the evening, just so you can see where we are. Then proceed again to mention it at the second meeting in June. Potentially come to the workshop and have a further discussion if residents would like to comment or give us some suggestions or ideas. And then look to the board for a July 18th approval of the contract. We may, and I just want to put that out, we've been talking and some of the feedback we heard from vendors. We may have an aggressive timeline on ordering the trash toters that we will need. So we may have to respectfully ask the board to turn the workshop meeting in June into a business meeting, put that as a topic, have a discussion if there's residents here, hopefully to help us, and then do that award at the end of the evening. So just want to put all those dates out there. Once again, we want that feedback. Renee did receive not many emails. She received one that said, thank you so much. We didn't hear anything about this. So we'll keep pushing. But I know it's important to the board on getting that component out. And I also want to mention too, because we're seeing it and we're trying to keep track, just to put out there that we know that this contract is going to start to be from an unlimited trash that we currently have to a limited. We know that's going to be difficult for residents. We feel that we'll have complaints in that area. So we've been trying to watch too and monitor the kind of things and when people put trash out. This was actually today. You'll notice that far exceeds one can that we're seeing at the street. We're going to go and keep checking routes, but that's going to be a difficult component for residents once that happens. And we think the board's going to hear probably some negative feedback on what we do with that. So just getting you a field view of what we're seeing. So that's the update on the garbage. Hopefully you gentlemen are satisfied and happy with the outreach that we continue to try to do. So, and if you hear anything, please, by all means, get them to the staff. We'll try to work them through it as best as we can.
So the plan is to have a trash bin as well as the recycle bin, probably about the same size, and that would be the limit of what they could put out.
That's correct. So what we're looking at in the bid documents, we've prepared for the actual garbage, if you want to call it that, solid waste component, a 96-gallon toter. And that is your limited trash now. If you would need additional containers, there would, of course, be a potential charge from the vendor for the actual service. And what we envision now is if you need more than a 96-gallon toter, you're going to have to buy another one. The initial contract would provide one to every resident, every property owner that participates. Recycle, we actually had a conversation today with staff and tried to pick everybody's brains. We were also leaning towards a 96-gallon toter for recyclables. We went around the conversation of, do we keep the 65s that we have now? The residents already have them. There's a potential to save $8 a quarter, maybe at this point. We make the containers last that you have. If you need additional recycle toters, the same thing. You would buy them, put them in service. We're struggling with the fact that we know there's a lot of cardboard usage. We know there's a lot of recycling that goes on in the township. How can we make sure, do we put a 96-gallon toter out for that and say as well, this is where you are? Or do we keep with the 65s, try to contain costs a little bit, and we move forward? We probably had about an hour discussion on this today on where it is. And that's something that if the board can give us maybe some feedback or direction as well, you know, how do you feel about that component?
Well, I can tell you, when we did the recycling toters the first time, we were surprised at the number of people who wanted smaller than what the normal one was.
About 1,000 people that we have on the list for 35.
Right. So that was an eye opener. Time. The question I have, and it comes from an important constituent, because it's my wife. What am I doing with my 2 garbage cans I have now?
Right.
How do I get rid of those? Like, where do they go?
Well, you would
Garbage
need
can heaven? Does someone pick them
gar-
up?
garbage can heaven. The recycle cans, like I said, if we keep the ones we have,
I'm not worried about that one.
But the
I'm in the 2 that I own that for garbage.
right. And that's going to be the difficult thing because with the automation, the cans have to be of a certain level to get picked up and put in. So correct. You're going to have to find a new home for those garbage cans.
Is there a possibility that the ones I have are able to be used? I mean, they're basically the exact same thing I have for recycling. So they were actually designed to be picked up by nature.
Potentially, we haven't had this kind of feedback yet. Potentially.
But only one.
Well,
Uh,
that's fine.
I would say it would be very difficult for staff and everybody to, and the ordering that we have to tell the vendor that I don't need a can here, I do
No,
need a can here.
I understand that.
Yeah.
My bigger question is, I have 2 garbage cans that they're only picking up garbage automatically or automatically. How am I getting rid of my garbage cans? Like, where do I take it?
Right.
And I work here. Like, I mean, think about people who don't work.
Right. Yeah, I think for us, we have to find a disposal way for trash. Or take this can, right? Put a big notice on it, take this can, or whatever we're going to do with it. That's a good point. I mean, not one we've had at the table yet, so. Yeah. All right. How do you feel about, we don't want to offer a variety of sizes either. We pick a recycle toter, it's 65. We let the 35s go into process. When they break, you get a 65. That's the way the contract, you know, unless you want to go bigger. And, you know, the concerns we're having and the feedback we've heard, if you have a smaller container and our residents and customers are used to stacking extra things, stacking those boxes on top, putting them on the side. With the automation, there will be no guys getting out of the truck or ladies, garbage people getting out of the truck, picking that up, putting it in the container anymore. So, or into the truck. So is there an expectation that we go as big as we can, 96? Everything's in the toter? Is there an expectation we go 65 and you get an extra if you need one?
I mean, I would think that for garbage, it's go big or go home. For recycling, it's a different story, because already, if it's not in the recycling bin, it doesn't get picked up. That's already the case. So people should be used to that part of it. And I think the recycling is where there's a want for something smaller, because they just don't have as much recycling, whereas everybody has one. You know, I have 2 cans. I don't always use 2 cans. Most of the time, I'm probably using one. It's probably the 65, if I had to guess. Maybe 62. I'm not sure, but there are times I use both. But I can assure you that I'll be cleaning my house out between now and August 1st. You know, of everything that I don't want in my house.
Yeah.
Be lined up all the way down the street.
And I think just for reference too, we're going to pull the numbers, but offhand, we think there's maybe 500 out of 9,000 that have an additional 65 recycle. So. All right, just an update on the roadway improvement program. We've put out bids actually now for the paving of Compost Center Road, Sauerkraut Extension, and a couple other up off of Hillview, couple segments. So as we talk about the Compost Road, we're going to have to accept the extension, accept the Compost Road through the board, get them then on the liquid fuels docket, have them allow us to spend those dollars that we're doing, and then wait for the contractor to get the paving done. So we're probably 60 to 90 days out But that's why we're looking for the aggressive process on adopting the roads real quick. So we're hopeful that we're in budget, within budget of those projects. And they open June 3rd. So we're also going to try to get a recommendation as quick as we can back to the board for that June 6th meeting. Do you have something, Brian, or are you good?
No, I just wanted to add that the plan that we showed before was just for the right-of-way area that's needed from the Lot 12 project. That between now and the June 6th meeting, we will have the exhibit and the legal description prepared for the entire right-of-way for the board to adopt. With, the idea being, we're going to doing this in conjunction with the paving, getting approved by PennDOT and so on and so forth. Yes, it is fast track.
Cool.
All right.
Anything, Maury?
Nope.
Continue, please.
Renee, you got the update on the zoning, right?
So as of now, we only have that one applicant that we already interviewed, although the deadline for the applications is next Monday, May 27th. In case we do get any applications, more applications than that one, we'll do the interview on June 6th.
Okay.
All righty.
Any questions on projects that we have, that you may or may not be aware of or need an update on?
Why, certainly.
Sure.
Okay, so the recreational equipment is out of Winding Brooks Park. And my understanding was that a pedestrian crossing at Princeton and Brookside would be put in before that came out. And just wanted to make sure that at least for next fiscal year, that is one of the projects that moves forward.
Yeah, and we did have to get part of Winding Brook out because of some of the things there with that facilities found. So we didn't want to let that one linger before we took it out.
Okay, but so it will be included as a project for next year, and all the permitting and so forth will get done this year and so forth, so it moves forward.
Hopefully, yes.
Just listing my expectations.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, and the safety control at Lower Macungie Road and Cedar Crest Boulevard.
I have to check with Stan on that one. I gotta
Okay, so
see if
it
it
was budgeted for this year, but I
and
haven't heard-
purchased, I believe. They had the some additional, not Brian Engineering, but additional engineering to make it work because of the bend down there.
Yeah.
So I gotta check with Stan to see where we are on it.
Okay, and is there any grant work going on to come up with funding for another playground for next year? Because I would like to still stick to the no more than one playground per year, except those covered by grants.
Yeah, so as we went forward, we didn't feel that we had enough sufficient evidence to get in for the closure this year because it closed in April. So we probably won't have a grant ready for the next year part. So it would be one budgeted playground.
Okay,
Kylene now has met with the state, worked through where we need to be. She's transitioning to now handle those components of the grant funding. She's also looking at the ones for comprehensive recreation planning too. So we're not going to probably have one for next year. We'll have an application in for April of 25.
and she's also looking at walking trail grants.
She is, those are the other component, the DCNR side of it, and looking at projects that they may or may not. One of the ones that we had on her list was Kratzer, and what we could do over there potentially. So she's trying to work through what's out there for us.
Okay, well, as far as paths are concerned, I would rather see the ones that get us someplace rather than get us in a loop.
Yeah, and I would note too about the past, and I think this is, as I was thinking about this the other day, on my drive somewhere, I think we should make sure too on the pathway components, especially in the greenway, the trajectory of the replacement time frame for the sewer lines that are in the ground there. We've continued to express our interest in when those get put in all the way down through the areas we've identified behind the building, over off of behind Princeton, that we have accessibility to those lines, but also have a trail path connection on top. So I want to be very mindful where that line drops down along Spring Creek, back, like I said, behind Princeton, down in here, that we don't go put efforts and monies in the pathways at this point until we know when they're gonna start putting that line in. I think that would be somewhat wasteful of us to do that, not to put pathways on hold, because I want to make sure we get proactive, but I don't want to put money in and then have them rip back up. So we actually provided our plans, and we had talked about this before, but we provided our trail plans that Brian had come up, the phasing for here, the one behind Wild Cherry, to the authority, so that they knew what our intentions are to do there.
Okay, and the final one, not that I would ever mention a X-year plan, but trucks. How are we doing in coming up with what is it, a 12-year plan?
Well, I like to think of a 5, 10, and a 20 long-range plan, especially with fleet planning, since some of these vehicles spend their life here, 15
Yeah.
or 20 years. So that plan is definitely has not materialized as I look to get that as quickly as what I want to see.
So are there gonna be any trucks in the budget for this year?
Probably not.
Okay,
Probably not, or very, very slim. I know we need a forklift, so that's going to be one of the things in the budget is the one we have. We've been working our way through it. So 40,000 for a forklift. That's one of the equipment pieces I see right now. The park maintenance and those divisions, facilities and parks, we're making headway with what we want to see over there from that division. So we may see some as a result of a 5 and a 10-year long-term planning for their equipment, we may see some purchases as far as that side.
so 1-ton pickup or dump trucks?
Correct. And potential for, I don't think it's coming this year, but potential for bucket truck, as our bucket trucks aging, lawn mowers, things of that nature as we're hearing excellent feedback from our facilities and parks crew chief now where we might want to go. So that part, we may have some purchases on that end.
Okay. That's it.
Anything else? Good.
Anything else from you?
No, just pool memberships are down right now significantly from what we saw last year. So the pool opens this weekend. We've completed the project back there. They just have to do a one small spot of some caulking back there around those actually new coping that they put in, like towards the shallow end. Other than that, the pool has water in it. It goes live for testing Wednesday. So we think we're in a good place for where we are. So we're hopeful that we'll start to see an increase in memberships.
Actually, there is another question.
Mhm.
The township / 22 home detention. Does that make its way into that unknown tributary?
Township.
The one-
You know what? We'd have to look at it. I think that does. Brian, the one off of Macungie Road with the half circle behind the park. Yeah, what's the name of that one, Nate?
The
35.
the
35
detention
Oh,
pond right next to the mobile home.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
What about that one? Sorry.
3510, Brian. I think it does. When you look at that.
It's the closest watershed and the closest
And so
tributary, so when they
we oughta-
designed it, they had to get it to the
We
closest tributary
probably ought to give an
anyway.
extra look to the design of the outlet structure for that.
See if, well, yeah. We could. We run the risk, though, that's that kind of fine line with doing something different that might kind of countermand the intent of the 167 study. So I hear you, and we can, let me make a
Well,
note.
it's just, okay, I'm not saying we ought to go against the 167 point.
Right,
I'm just saying that there is a problem with that unnamed tributary,
right.
and we ought to understand what flows are going into
Oh, yeah, for sure.
and just what the cumulative effect is.
Right.
And have it make some kind of,
Right. No, I agree. Yeah, and I kind of, in my head, I'm trying to think of what I know they're expanding the existing basin as part of their design. Off the top of my head, I don't recall how much additional storage they're providing, because most often, if you're allowed to just pick in numbers, you're allowed to discharge 20 CFS. Because of the way the calculations work out, they usually wind up discharging 17 or something like that. It's usually not to the nut of what they're allowed. So, but I will make a note to see what they're got going on.
okay.
And if there's something we can do to get them to do a little more, if that's not.
Well, I don't know if doing more or doing less,
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was
but
hedging.
it's,
That's why I was hedging.
but we ought to be aware.
Yep.
Oh, and Nate. The thing of the publishing the agenda a week in advance, I think that's fine, but, okay, I ran into a situation of I set up coming back early from Disney, so I could be at the Tuesday night meeting and then getting the thing of, it was canceled on Friday. What I think would be beneficial would be to start just for internal distribution. These are the items that have been submitted and have not gone before the planning commission with a big note on it that says they might or might not be on the next meeting. So then people are aware of what has been submitted, what's in the pipeline, but don't have expectations that it'll be on a particular meeting.
So first, I'm sorry that it impacted your vacation because vacations are very important. But second, it was an interesting situation because the only item that we had on our agenda that evening, and since we had open discourse with them about it multiple times, they're in technical review, was the Lehigh Valley Town Center. And they received their most recent review letters such that not just from the township, but also from third-party agencies where once they received everything, they felt that it was wise for them to be pulled from the agenda. And they made that determination on that Friday.
And
So,
that was fine, but at this point, nobody has any idea what has been submitted and might come up for review in a month or two.
understood. I think a project pipeline submission to the
Yeah.
board and to staff internally is probably the way to go then, to let you know what we have on the MPC time clock.
And
Looking forward at the next month, hopefully, again, if third-party items are taken care of, that Lehigh Valley Town Center
Yeah.
plan will be back on the agenda with a recommendation, but they're waiting on the green lights from PennDOT and the Conservation District at this juncture,
Yeah.
so.
But so, yeah, just something to track things that have been submitted but haven't been reviewed yet by the planning. And so it could be a couple months old.
I have a working document like that, so I can circulate that to staff and the board easily.
Okay, so yeah, the standard internal distribution. Thank you.
Anything else, Maury?
No.
Anything for Ron or for Brian? Clear up.
I think I'll shut up. You did a good enough time talking for the first hour.
True, very true. There will be a very brief executive session following this meeting, and we are adjourned. Lose me there for a second. My blood sugar started